Censorship is the child of fear and the father of ignorance. Laurie Halse Anderson speak. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. There was a recent local story out of London, Ontario that made a lot of noise because it had to do with the London Catholic School Board pulling a celebrated Black author's work from their curriculum. And any story like this, that they'll always end up making a lot of noise because when it has to do with free speech and freedom of speech, it gets people riled up, and understandably so. You know, censors are going to censor. It's been a story as long as there's been a printing press. But this story, I know was of particular interest to Kelly MacDonald. Ramya Amuthan is with me, but so is Kelly MacDonald, the host of Kelly and Company on AMI Audio. I want to say hi to both of you.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Yo, Kels, can you break down this Lawrence Hill story for us?
Lawrence Hill is a local author, and I'll be honest, I didn't realize that. I think at one point I did when I read the book many years ago, and found the book very interesting, but I do not
Sorry,
believe...
which book was this?
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. The Book of Negroes. And it was a book that I think I just defaulted, like most people, to thinking, oh, this Lawrence Hill, it's got to be an American writer. The Catholic School Board in London recently removed it from its reading lists of any capacity. Now, I have no idea how often it's read, was called upon, but they banned it from being utilized by teachers at any point. I believe it was used in the higher grades at grade 12 as part of the reading, and don't know how much required and to what class. So part of the attraction, of course, is he's local. Maybe that had something to do with it. The book itself, very well written. And again, one of those things that when it came out, it got a lot of attention here in Canada because of being a Canadian playwright. The content, I can't speak to its popularity throughout the rest of the world or in the United States. But again, I didn't realize he was Canadian. So, he was from London. Not at the time. So they have decided this book uses the N-word a little too many times. I think their policy now is one time is too many. The book itself uses it 23 times. I believe I'm going off the top of my head with that number. Lawrence, of course, in his defense, that is 23 times where, as a writer, I felt I was using it properly, not gratuitously. So at this point, and one of the teachers spoke at the school board for wanting to use it, was suspended. I'm not sure for how long. I haven't heard any more on that in the stuff that I've read or looked around if they're back to work or any of that stuff. So I won't speak to that. And then, of course, comes the questions of what we're going to ban, why we're going to ban it, and I think so many other things that come from that. We're very defaulted, and me as a Black person, I'm very defaulted to, but people need to understand these things, need to not forget. But I'm also a person who has not lived in places where I've been called a lot of names. If one asked me, where have you felt the most prejudice, I'd have to say as a blind person, then as a big person, and then maybe as a Black person. And maybe that's because of the nature in Canada. We are a little more, oh, yeah, see that guy just walked by? Yeah, he's a big Black, whatever. And they may have their comments, or I don't even know why they're letting him in here. But I would not hear said dialogue in Canada, where maybe other places in the world, they'd be far more open to that. So I do still, though, due to my upbringing, the people I've been around, and that think we need to know about these things. But I'm not sure up here in Canada and London, Ontario, do we need to know as much as we used to when we did a lot more American history? Do we need to include a book like this?
I do recall a lot of American history.
A lot.
You know, we read like To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and a lot of other American books. It's almost like too American-centric, the books that we have to read in English class. And
we know about O. Henry,
right?
And everybody else, but not Canadian writers.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of great Canadian reads. I will say, I went to a French high school, and our French classes were almost exclusively Canadian writers. So they did make that effort. But when it comes to Lawrence Hill's book, they banned it specifically because of the language, not the setting, or at least not explicitly the setting. They said it was because of the language itself, the fact that they use the N-word 23 times.
Yeah, not the content.
It's not the content. How does that make you feel specifically? The language, not what it means, not in what context it's used in the book, not the reason why it was used. Like, it's interesting specifically because of the word.
Jacob, I'm kind of torn because I performed in an adaptation here in London of what you just mentioned, To Kill a Mockingbird, about 10 years ago. And I know my mother said, my late mother, I don't want to come see your show. Why?
Why not?
They use the N-word.
Wow.
I don't want to hear it in there. I don't want to be in there. And she ended up coming. Ended up enjoying the show immensely, which, again, my mother must have been torn too. My son's in this show. My sister wanted to bring her to it. And I understand for her, which my mother was a person who came from Nova Scotia. There is different meanings and different circumstances out there that she dealt with growing up. My dad, Montreal-based, really, from born in Ottawa, but lived in Montreal most of his life before we moved to London. And a different viewpoint. If he had still been with us, he would have loved to have come to see the show and looked at it differently. I'm not sure at that time because my mom certainly watched lots of shows and was a fan of Roots and things like that. So to kind of dig her heels in about this puzzled me. But I had to respect that for some people, they're going to. And I was torn because I think it's a great literary book, but did it need to be performed? Well, it's being performed because it's a great literary book. Everybody knows To Kill a Mockingbird. You're going to have a stable of actors in London who want to do it. We did it as part of Black History Month. We had some events that were associated with the play as part of Black History Month. So most of us in the Black community saw the value and importance of doing this show. I have a hard time seeing a book banned because of a word. But on the same token, the fear that we tend to go with always is, yeah, but are we going to open up the door because it's sort of like the little boy who gets to use a bad word when he learns about jackass and, I'm saying ass, right? And you're 6, but the jackass, it's in the Bible or wherever you may hear these words or, whatever someone wants to say. I think we tend to fear that kind of thing instead of understanding, well, this word's in there because it's supposed to be nasty, unpleasant, and not something we want to get caught saying.
That's kind of the point.
Yeah, we know that about the F-bomb. We know that about, the pseudonym for pooping, right? Like we know about the S word. We know, hey, it's don't say that in mixed company or don't do that. Come on, keep it to yourself.
But I think wordage or language is one of the more surface level arguments for censorship, right? Like, what about all the deeper things, like religious context and, other, deeper reasons why people think it's absolutely not just appropriate, but necessary for an entire mass of people not to get their hands on things. Mm-hmm. And there are people, like literary individuals who have huge opinions on this, Jacob, on like why censorship is such a thing. Like, it's fear-based, obviously. I think we can agree on that. But what are we really afraid of people getting their hands on? And when do we kind of say the justification is just not enough?
So I looked into some of the most commonly cited reasons for banning books, and I'll tell you right now that the most common place where books are banned is in school boards to stop young people, students, from being exposed to what's deemed inappropriate. And
early.
More often than not, it's explicit sexual content, drug use, lifestyle choices, profanity. But that's the surface level, right? It's the language and what's being exposed there. But the thing is, guys, it's the 21st century. We have the internet.
Exactly.
Kids know every single swear word by the time they're 10. Their parents pretend that their kids don't know, but obviously you know. I don't think it's controversial to say that banning doesn't really work. Nope. People will find workarounds and find out about things, especially not with books, not anymore. It's incredibly easy to get books, even if they're banned. Like You can still find stuff on Audible and online and in ebooks, and hell, you can even sail the high seas to get audiobooks nowadays.
But the concept of banning still exists heavily, right? Banning TikTok, banning this, banning that. Like, we're in the digital age, and social media has got more influence than books potentially, in a deeper sense. But the philosophy of banning, and let's not have our kids get their hands on this thing, so us older people are going to make the decision to remove the option, is still very much out there. But of course, with school boards, we say books because it's part of the education system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you bring up TikTok, and that's a good example because people found a workaround. They just went to Red Note for the 24 hours that it was down, right? Like, there's always a solution to these things. And in practice, banning anything just ends up being virtue signaling.
Yep.
You telling, yeah, well, this kind of content, I do not agree with it, even though I know it's still around and pretty easily available if you're willing to look for it.
And around the table, I think we can all agree that it doesn't work, right?
No,
because
it obviously doesn't. Not anymore. It's not like it used to be where you actually had to get your hands on a book.
Yes.
Yeah,
right?
it's easier to take an actual book out of a library.
Yeah.
This is more of a gesture of, we'll have no part of this. So
then what happens with the advocates for free speech? Like, do we still need people out there fighting for free speech? Obviously, it's got to be happening, but what are the examples of that? Because back in the day, if books were banned, we have people literally stepping up, protesting and being like, this is unacceptable. We need free speech. Censorship is BS. But now we see censorship in different contexts, I guess. But do we still, like, because of all the access to information that we obviously have, do we still need that kind of radical free speech movement going on?
I look at stuff that we have to point to as history repeats itself. And right now we're getting a lot of that in the political sphere of people claiming Nazi here and wanting to, when you hear it, say, what do you mean? You're a younger person. What are you talking about? Oh, going back to that World War I and II stuff. And what's that mean? And books like Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, were banned in so many places. But then there's a time where you try to explain to somebody, well, this is what it means. This is where that came from. Oh, I don't still understand. Well, maybe you should you can't read the book. There's that fear of propaganda, but I'm teaching somebody something. You know, we used to talk about the cookbook thing that used to teach people how to design pipe bombs and different things like that, and how those things shouldn't be, and we can find them on the dark web and all these things everywhere. And anyone reading it who has no intention to hurt anyone is going to say, oh my God. And that's about it. Oh my goodness. I think what we try to do is get out ahead of, well, what if that bad person or somebody has a problem, wants to do harm or something? We're always trying. All of us know, like you said, at 10 years old, oh, don't use that word. I learned a lot of books that I read audiobooks when I was a kid. Oh, can't say that word. I've been told not to say that. Or even here in the book, that's being used to hurt someone's feelings.
You didn't say it. You just read it.
No, you read it.
It's not the same. Like, you have the judgment to know what's not okay in a book. Just because I'm reading about murder doesn't mean I'm going to go commit murder.
No, but even swear words or whatever one would worry about, that he's going to read that, go to school tomorrow, and then be on detention for a month because he called the teacher that or whatever. But in the book, the person who called it might have got punched in the head for saying it. I thought, well, I don't want someone punching me in the head. I ain't going to say that. So as a kid, I learned, I'm plugging my ears. I'm hearing this in my audiobook. Turn it down. I don't want dad or mom to hear that I'm reading this book that has somebody saying, damn, in it.
It's so much easier to get away with an audiobook than a TV show from your parents, right?
You put on
pop in some earphones. Yeah.
I'm reading a book. It's educational.
That's right.
You just get away with anything.
Yeah.
Did your teacher assign that? I'm going to the school to. Oh, jeez. Yeah. I think that's for me where I think of all the things I learned from books. Maybe some things not so good. Maybe some things that were great. But I'd like to believe they help me understand privacy, concerns, and respect for other people. What not to say, where to talk about certain things and not to. To understand that some people don't want to hear that. Some people you're going to offend. That's not the right way to treat a person. I want to believe, and sometimes we take things away that send those messages. But I'll say, guys, in this case, I understand this is more of a London story. I haven't really heard it around the rest of Canada. And I think a lot has to do with, hey, it's our treasured local author and stuff like that. It's our Catholic school board that is committing the
It
affront.
hits home.
And I have no idea how many other school boards have been doing the same thing. One of the things that I said to Jacob the other day is, you got to always contextualize too. Are we reading the book because it's a local author? Are we reading it based on its merit because it does have an interesting message? Is there other books we could be reading? And here in Canada, as we look at what the history in the United States, is this a book at that time, part of this course, that needs to be read? And I hesitate because I don't want to hear, oh, you're not allowing us to read such an important book. And
but that is what it feels like, though.
It does, because someone's saying, well, I don't want you reading it. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm going to read it then for sure.
It's reverse psychology. You tell someone not to do it.
Yeah.
And they just want to do it. But to bring it back to the Lawrence Hill book, the thing is, when we're talking about the N-word that's being used 23 times here, you want people to engage with this book because you want people to understand the context of the word, what it means, because it's much more than just a word that you hear in hip-hop music, right? It has a history. It means something. It came from somewhere. And even though the meaning might change, it's really helpful and important to understand the history, to understand the weight and how it can be hurtful and how it can be used.
If I may say, when you say that, I think about being called names, at 12, 15 years old at school. And I'd tell my mom and dad, and my reaction to a lot of the names, including the racial names, was to laugh in the person's face. My mother would go out of her mind. It was so egregiously offensive. My dad kind of took it more casual. And I got puzzled by it. And as you mentioned, the artists that use it, and I came to realize, obviously I have not come from the 1800s where I was a slave. Maybe the word was, in the definition then, and maybe an accompanying smack from a whip or so. I don't know, but I understand. I would not be able to place myself in the time of this book and that to understand the author's trying to sell you on, this is horrible. It's not meant to be pleasant. For at this time, you who never went through this, whether you're a white reader, whether you're a black person who wasn't there at the time, you are going to feel that sting. Me laughing in the face of people calling me names. When I told my mom, well, my reaction was to laugh at it. Don't you laugh at that? Yeah, that is offensive.
Yeah.
He should. Where for me, it's what? But I didn't have the same sting or discomfort. So for me, it's just some moron running his mouth.
Sure. And then that's humanity, right? Like the reactions we have and historical repressions of different populations and things like that. But even the fact that we're discussing this means we have to look deeper. And that's what these books are technically providing. But I think the question that gnaws at me around censorship always is like, what are we safeguarding people from?
Yep.
The profanity and the, don't make bad choices. Let's just remove the context of bad choices from your hands, right? Like the video games, the terrible hip hop videos, the profanity, the sexual content, all that stuff is very obvious. But when it comes to like deeper historical context, and we see just the way that political leaders censor even today to try to get information out of people's hands so that, don't worry about that decision. We know what's best for society. And we know there are books that explore this kind of, I think it's even sad to say dystopia is not even realistic. It's not accurate anymore because it feels very realistic in society right now, sadly. But the concept of censorship is to safeguard or this distrust that the population can't handle it. Like we can't handle the information.
Idea.
Well,
that's the idea.
That's the impression you're meant to. In this
but
case,
is it
it's the
even
school board
accurate?
protecting itself.
We can look deeper at concepts and philosophize and say, yeah, I get it. I get why the history of the N-word should be deeply considered, versus just like a toss it. It's a surface level conversation and it's only in rap videos and I can say whatever I want. That's one part. But the other part of it is like, do people think that it's not, that we can't handle the depth of the information?
that we can't handle the depth.
Like we can't handle the deeper explorations.
Well, we
So
won't
it's better
bother.
to just remove
But
it.
our society won't bother. We don't have time for that. We're told not to say it, except in this venue you can do, this venue you can't. The school board, let's be straight. The school board's protecting itself so no family comes along and says, how dare you, or why are you teaching?
That's a
and
really
pulls
good point,
themselves up.
Kelly.
They're
They're really just defending themselves.
That's right.
So that
They're
the parent doesn't come back home and go like, why the hell are you making my kid read this? It has
That's right.
profanity in it. It says it 23 times. Like, they're just protecting themselves.
They are. And now that's a school situation. A library may have a different reason for doing it. A community is going to have, there are communities out there that are maybe very religious. They're going to ban books differently than another community that may not be that way, and ban something that you'd say, why the heck would you ban that? Well, it's too religious.
Yeah, there's some
What?
very conservative religious communities that will ban anything that has any kind of connotation with explicit sexual content or even non-explicit. And it's generational too. I think what we consider explicit sexual content is not what our grandparents considered explicit sexual content. Like back in the day, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger was heavily banned. And it was stated because of its profanity, which it doesn't even use that much, and the sexual content, which I read that book. I'm like, how is this offensive to people? Like, there's a generational divide there.
Well, but Jacob, we've talked about this with old radio shows. What people say back then, a lot of stuff there is offensive to women. There's no question. Whereas in the 70s on television, there were words such as the N-word that were used in so many sitcoms. We go away from that. Now we bring back the use of certain words in conventional mainstream TV, and certainly what you have on streaming services. And we go back and forth in allowance and just
Sensibilities change very
Yes.
fast.
Yes.
Very fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think generally speaking, we love to pick black or white, right? First of all, no, we don't want to. We're so uncomfortable exploring the gray areas. We don't want people asking too many questions. And that's why religious context makes so much sense, because in religion, things are black or white. It's right and it's wrong. So if it's wrong, take it off the shelves. And that's easy to kind of just mass
And that was the rule of thumb.
message.
50, 70 years ago and back, right?
Yeah.
It was basically if it went against the church, I don't mean necessarily specifically the church, but the norms, the morals,
the moral compass. Yeah, exactly.
away it went. That's what the compass was. Exactly.
Yeah, you're following the rules. And
Now insurance companies are the moral compass. You're going to get sued for using that? My child. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
There's a prerogative for libraries to have any book available, because if you're a library that doesn't hold the books that people want to read, then what are you doing? A library is supposed to be in its grand ideal, you want a library to be like this repository of knowledge. But if you're picking and choosing what knowledge is available to you, then what are you doing? But I do want to bring it back to the fact that this show is an audiobook show. And one of the beautiful things about books and authors and writing is that authors have a lot more leeway in publishing what they want to publish, regardless of how controversial it might be. Way more than TV shows or movies, which need to get greenlit 5 or 6 times and approved by giant boardrooms of executives. The books that are considered incredibly controversial, like Lolita, which portrays like a relationship with an underage girl, and popular nonfiction books that have very controversial ideas. If those books were to be made into like a movie or a documentary, imagine the controversy. So all that to say, books are kind of a bastion of free speech, because you get to read something that has the potential to be fully unsanitized in a way that TV shows and movies don't.
Yeah, there's way less of the filtration process, as you're describing.
Is that because people can't generally, as a kid, whatever, you don't just necessarily pick the book up whether you can read or not? I think there's that level of click, 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 changing channels on the TV or going on to Netflix or whatever. Kids at 4 or 5 years old can do that, versus they're more accidentally able to come across, if you want to use that excuse, and again, I'm still saying so much of this stuff is a protection measure, than a book where you can put all these things in. The person who purchases it takes it out of the library. At the library, if a kid shows up with that book in there, no.
Well, yeah, it's rare that you're going to accidentally read a book. If you're reading something controversial, you probably know what you just picked up through word of mouth or whatever it may be. Like if you're flicking through a TV channel, there's more chances of you falling accidentally onto it. But I think a reason why TV shows and movies are more sanitized with less controversial topics, like think of how unpolitical Hollywood is for the most part.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
like
we're pushing
I
for
think
the
it's
opposite.
because they want to sell. They want it to be sellable.
Yep.
Yeah.
But whereas books, sometimes people are more idealistic and just say, I need to put this out there.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to interpret with books. It's not just, hey, that guy's naked on screen, take him off. Like, it's just, there's so much subtext. You're reading between the lines. There's so much left for interpretation. And so it is really the opposite process where you're like, take this book off the shelves because I don't want my
Instead
kid
of
to
show
get
and
into
tell, there's a lot more story and decipher.
Yep.
You know, Kels, you've been a content creator. I know that you've written plays and, you've been a host on AMI for a long time. Like, have you ever felt that you were hamstrung by sensibilities? Where
God, yes.
To be more blunt, have you ever felt censored?
Oh, constantly. And sometimes
Really?
it's in my own head, right? It's I want people to come see the show. Will they take this? And once I wrote a fringe show that it was about broadcasting, funny enough. Some of the parts in the show, there was some heavy language. And I had people who frequented the fringe come up to me and say, "Oh, I was a bit surprised your theater troupe ruled that show out," which I said, "Oh, how come?" And it was their perception of who we were. We wouldn't do a show like that. So unfortunately, anytime I started to write things, I had to think about it and other things as to how will people take this? I have a meaning I want them to have. How can I make sure it's expressively, this is what I'm trying to point out. This is what I'm trying to accomplish, as opposed to in a book like Ramya says, the interpretation. If they get it at the moment, okay, they get it. If they don't, they don't.
Yeah. It's wild how much is in our own heads just because we know about how people might react to censorship or to free speech, right? Like we're just toggling on and off all the time. Yeah.
Yep.
And part of that is political correctness. You want to be careful with what you say. Authors want to be careful with what they write. TV shows want to be careful with what they put out. So there's no controversy around them.
And we all have someone like my mom. I'm not coming to see that because they're going to use that word.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm really curious about your mom's perspective on that. Like, can you dig a little deeper? Like, why do you think that she had such a stronger reaction to racial slurs like that than you did?
And I don't know. I think
You don't
in
know.
her past, growing up,
Generational,
there was that generation. It was offensive. I think not necessarily knowing. Like, I mean, my mom had seen the movie, but in her mind, the context in something like Roots, it seemed to belong. Some of it, I think, was her ignorance of the actual play, what it was about, and knowing that it was based on, but not truth. It was, not a full, honest, this is the experiences that happened, where I think she viewed Roots as far more of a lesson, a teaching moment.
It was certainly more of a fight for her than it felt like a fight for you.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Because I've always loved the book. Again, a book we read in school when I was... in grade 6. So that says something of the time.
Guys, that's all the time we have. I have to cut it there. I promise I'm not trying to censor you. This is a great conversation. Kels, thanks so much for coming on and bringing up this topic. I feel like we could keep going for another 20 minutes, but Ramya, also big thanks to you too. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks.
You too.
That's all the time we have for today's AMI audio book review. If you're listening on AMI audio, remember that it airs on weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it repeats every 6 hours. It's also available on YouTube, so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's also available in audio only wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Have a good one.